This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data and analysis over at businessofapps.com.
Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. On this show, we invite app industry professionals to cover various topics. We promise to do our best to keep it both insightful but brief. In this episode, we have Fabien-Pierre Nicolas, advisor of SmartNews. Fabien, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming. All right. If you are an app marketer, one of the things at your job that raises your pulse and eyebrows is a mobile churn. This is the KPI that measures the percentage of users who have abandoned your app. The logic goes, the smaller the number, the better. But unfortunately, in real life, this number always bigger than you would want it to be. So people leave apps, in some cases due to some glitches, but in some cases because their interests change. From a technical perspective, the app may be fine, but it just doesn't deliver the experience they need. In this episode, Fabien will tell us the story of chasing app users' interests that are changing rapidly. But first, let's kick off the conversation with talking about you, Fabien. Please tell us about your background.
So my background has been essentially initially in gaming. I started at Ubisoft, which is a well-known, console and PC publisher in France, then transferred to the US. And fast forward a few years, I realized a lot of people were coming to focus group to discuss their favorite games and bringing smartphones and playing on their phones. So I was like, it's time to follow where the consumers are going, which is they're going to play more and more on their phone. So I decided to join a company named DNA, which was a Japanese mobile gaming giants, and started publishing a lot of games. And luckily, with my team, were had like some amazing games, including Marvel War of Heroes, that made it to #1 top grossing in the US. So we scaled the business a lot. After that, I joined Data.ai, which is a mobile market data vendor, for a few years. And finally, I joined SmartNews, which is a mission-driven company. So SmartNews is all about providing quality information. More recently, and that's why I'm just an advisor at SmartNews, I decided diversity and inclusion was a great way to make an impact and something we're not working enough on. And so I decided to join a friend of mine who started software as a service platform that aim at helping businesses change on key topics like racism, sexism, homophobia, and so on, and helping them transform the bias we'll have when we're looking at people who are different. And so this is what I'm currently working on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know that your work with Japanese-based company now is not the first one. I thought SmartNews was the first entry to the Japanese market. It's actually the second.
No, exactly. I think, at the end of the day, when it comes to mobile games, the Japanese mobile gaming scene, they were the first one to really realize the monetization potential. And it was even before the smartphone era, right? It was the feature phone era. They're able to excel at monetization loop. And when it comes to mobile apps, I will say, certain like Japanese app makers have really excelled in different categories, whether it's, of course, anime, manga reading, but as well in terms of news discovery. SmartNews was the first one to really leverage machine learning technology when it comes to news aggregation product. By comparison, a lot of the Western products, Apple News, for example, or Flipboard, which was sort of the first to market in the West, we're still relying on human curation, which of course provides a bias when machine learning could essentially, in my opinion, at least provide a superior user experience.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's hard to remember the market before the smartphone era. That back in those days, the games like how the landscape of that market and the Japanese developers were really big innovators on that frontier. Now, to be honest, before I saw your presentation at IPS New York City this spring, I didn't hear about SmartNews. I should confess, I'm Apple News user. I guess that's the reason why I'm stuck with the one app, and I have no idea what's going on with the news aggregators overall. I used to be Flipboard user, and before that, there was another app. I just don't remember that name, but they were purchased for somebody. but these days is for me it's list Apple News. But please forgive me my ignorance. Tell me about Smart News. Why it's smart?
Well, first of all, you're forgiven because Smart News is really focused on Japan and the US. So, if you're in many European countries, Smart News is currently not available in the App Store for those users.
Mhm.
We've made this decision like a few years ago. So again, no harm done there. When it comes to Smart News is on a mission, right? It's a mission-driven company, and it's here to provide quality information
Mhm.
where social products, especially, but as well some of the news app you've described, tend to recommend news just based on your habits and essentially your interests. We want to make sure, of course, we tailor some of the articles you're seeing to your interest, but as well that we're providing you quality information that everybody should engage with. And I think this is, a differentiating factor for Smart News is the fact of being mission-driven company, not just purely on mission to say, hey, we take content from everywhere, we deliver to you in function of the click-through rate. We look at a lot of quality index in our machine learning. Um, you know, at the end of the day, Smart News is number one by far in Japan when it comes to news consumption, right? We're about 4 times bigger than our nearest competitor. And in the US, I think we are already on the podium. So there is Apple News that's bigger than us on iOS and Google News on Android, but we're in the top three. We're bigger than product like CNN, New York Times, Fox News, and many other well-known apps, right, that are in the market. And of course, Flipboard as well. I should mention it since you were a former user of Flipboard.
Yeah, yeah.
So there is no doubt we've convinced a really large number of US users that we are here to provide them quality information, and they have embraced it and they love it. And our time is much higher than the rest of the app in the category, which show that as well. Our machine learning is much better at providing you quality information and not clickbait.
Well, that's interesting. So you can say conquer two markets by now, Japanese and American one. Can you see any familiarity, any similar trends, how people use the app? Just from the top of your head, some general conclusions, general observations.
Yeah.
Do they check small chunks of usage throughout the day or on weekends, something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think there's definitely some peaks that correspond that exist essentially in both countries, right? So typically, I think a lot of people are consuming news in the morning time. Just as you wake up, you want to
Right.
engage with the world
Mhm.
and you want to catch up with what happened, might have happened while you were asleep. And
Right.
there is as well a phenomenon of consumption right before going to bed. It's like the end of your work day, you're finished essentially. Uh, and you would like to as well sort of catch
What
up with
what
everything that
elements?
happened during
Right.
your work time. I think the one difference we're seeing is Americans tend to be a little bit more flat during the day, consume at different times. There's a time zone difference, right, that exists in the US that doesn't exist in Japan, versus
Mhm.
Japan with a really big consumption around lunchtime. Before, as you guys, a lot of Japanese are getting lunch outside, right? They go and walk to a convenience store or restaurant to buy their lunch. So a lot of the time when they're in line, they're reading the news, and after they're getting their lunch, you have a lot of people this not necessarily being in a group of people, but rather like eating quickly their lunch. They're consuming the news at this time. This is not something we're seeing in the US market, for example.
Oh, that's an interesting difference. And we have to remember that, just pure geography. The Japan is a country way smaller than the US, and it doesn't have that many time zones, right? So in US, you would expect people having, breakfast in 4 or 5 different times. In Japan, it will be way smaller.
Want to improve your app marketing skills? Know how to fight back mobile fraud? Or how to launch an influencer marketing campaign? You've got it all at the Business of Apps Insights. Opinion, how-tos, thought leadership, and analysis from global app and social media industry. Visit our Insights section at businessofapps.com/insights/podcast. And now, back to the show.
Now, in New York, you took the stage to talk about several steps you made to introduce consumer-driven innovation culture to the app's existing product-driven innovation culture. So before laying out those steps for our listeners, let's define the terms first. So what is product versus innovation-driven culture? and why you decided such introduction was necessary?
Yeah. Well, so I think a good way to approach it, and again, we did not, give up on a product innovation culture, right? We just simply added more consumer-driven innovation culture. So the way I will define, product-driven innovation culture is, and this is, the root of SmartNews, is you have like super bright founders. They are really in touch with, the largest target audience that they intend to serve, and they have such great knowledge of this audience that they almost like don't need to do too much consumer research, too much market segmentation, and so on. They are capable of inherently having the right intuition and to build for it. And I think such a product-driven innovation culture, sort of like the capability to read into the future of what your user will want, even if they don't know it yet, is amazing. And that's something we retain to this day, where we had, for example, our CEO say, "Hey, weather. I'm sort of frustrated with the way weather is approached right now,
Mhm.
which is sort of this static way of looking at the weather forecast. I would like to see, a much more dynamic approach." And so, there's a rain alert and weather radar that was built using external data, but as well really providing a unique user experience that provides a great deal of value and is a huge hit with our Japanese users. So that's the product-driven innovation culture. And on the other end, and especially when it comes to a country like America, that's like extremely diverse. You look at many different segments of users, walks of life, age, origins, and so on. I think there's something extremely important, which is at some point, productivity driven innovation isn't enough, or you can't have enough people in touch with those different segments. So as a result, you need to go to a consumer driven innovation culture where your first step is essentially understanding the way the market is being segmented and listening to those different segments really closely, how they react to your product, what is their life expectation, what is their frustration and pain points in their lives, and then you could essentially build for them. And I could go later into like some examples of that, but this is inherently the way I will define product driven innovation versus consumer driven innovation.
Got you. So over and over in the podcast, the answers that my guests are giving to me, we kind of reminds me about the major concept in the marketing: know your customer, um, and which implies know the culture of the country where those customers are located. And if it's more monoculture, like in Asia, less diverse, this is the one expectations, once my kind of a mindset. If you're moving to the other market, to the other country, we're more diverse in terms of different cultures, different expectations, and all these people are your app users. You need to be able to tune in your app to each of these segments and factoring in interests of all these peoples, all these different cultures. Yeah, that's still a great point. Now, let's start talking about those points you laid out in New York, starting with the number one, segmentation. So why you thought that step was necessary, and what did it involve?
Yeah, well, I think I will probably compare it to you have a dartboard, right? And so essentially your marketing budget is to say, hey, where should I throw my dart and who should I aim this budget at,
Mm.
right? And so until you figure out what your user map is and the user segments that might have a stronger appeal, otherwise, you will be extremely inefficient, right? You will try to aim for many targets without knowing what makes them react, and are they extremely interested or not so much in your product. So drawing this map of the different consumer segments and then being thoughtful about selecting them, and of course then about building a plan to essentially win them over to your product versus the competition. It's a very competitive space, as you know, is why I think starting with consumer segmentation matters. That's the intellectual part of the answer. I think there is a deeper reason why I think it's extremely important if you're leading growth or marketing in a mobile app team, and especially in a market as diverse as the US. we all have, as I discussed, right, about diversity and inclusion bias. The
Mhm.
same bias apply because we do typically belong to a segment and potentially to a segment that is, targeted by the product and the company we choose to join. And
Right.
so to abstract yourself and be like, whoa, sure, I am in this segment. So in my specific case, I'm in the plugged in professional, which is one of our three segments. But at the end of the day, should I target myself? Maybe, maybe not, right? So taking this step where you're building the consumer segmentation, assessing the size of each segment, the appeal of your product, the appeal of your competition, right, for each of those segments is extremely important. So you abstract yourself from your own bias and from your team's bias as well, right? Because we
Right.
might all belong to the same segment. And again, it is very dangerous to have tunnel vision. Hopefully not. I always try to hire people from diverse background and make sure precisely we don't all come from the same company, from the same industry. But still, right, we might all be in New York and San Francisco, might all belong to a certain like age group or age categories.
Mhm.
And so as a result, we all bring sort of similarities of perspective that could be dangerous in terms of building the best efficiency for the business.
Yeah, I totally understand that it can be extremely hard to be able to have a team that represents all segments of your app. Next to impossible. You would have to hire people in specific regions, states, or parts of the country. But it's not like feasible in a real business. You have to grow first, then make more money, allocate some certain budgets to grow your team not all the way around. You cannot hire people first and then grow. But yeah, that's really important point to keep in mind when you're approaching the market, that people who are working with you in your team not necessarily, most likely, do not represent the audience of your app. You have, most likely you may have a kind of the same mindset, or close mindset. That's why you have such a great team working on a single project. Now, let's move to the next step, which was deciding on specific segments. So which ones you pick up to scale, and why did you choose those?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So out of the 6 segments we saw in the market, we really pick segments that had essentially medium high to high intent to download when we describe what our product was. We pick as well those 3 segments because comparatively speaking, they had like clear pain points versus some of the existing offering in the market. It's always easier when people are at somewhat of frustration with what's available to actually convince them to try your product. And the third aspect is we look at the trust. Trust is a key currency when it comes to news. Why? Because precisely we're trying to provide quality information. News is information, and it's only if you're capable of sort of like trusting products that are not the brand names, that are not New York Times or Fox News and so on. But to say, hey, those people are providing me a diverse set of news sources, a little bit like a convenience store, a supermarket will provide you a diverse set of brands, right?
Mhm.
But you need to as well say, I could put my trust in something that is not a known entity at the moment,
Mhm.
right? And so that was the third dimensions we consider beyond their frustration with existing offering and intent to download smart news. That resulted in us picking 3 segments. I will start with the largest of those 3 segments, which we call settled suburbanites. So their average age is in their 50s. So that spawns, goes all the way from low 40s to their 70s.
Mhm.
They're typically not living in the city. That's why they're suburbanite, but they're not living in the
Right.
countryside either, right? They're in between. They are very diverse, politically speaking, right? There is an equivalent amount that are conservative, liberal, or I will say in between.
Yeah.
And again, very large segment, still consume TV, linear TV, and cable TV, pretty heavily. And is still very engaged with Facebook. They're a little bit older, right? Now the second segment that we targeted is called culture connector. Again, typically mostly suburban, not necessarily living downtown, extremely diverse, diverse in terms of ethnicity. There as well, several suburbanites still had politics and world news in their top bucket. Culture connectors are really have diverse interests, but politics is, one of the 5 or 6 things they are following. They're looking at entertainment news, they are looking at culture news, art news, many different things. That's why they're cultured, right?
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
essentially interested in many dimensions of life. The age is younger. They are in their mid 30s in the average, and span all the way to low 20s up to mid 40s, and diverse, as I said. And the last one is, and they're skewing female somewhat. And last one is plugged in professional, skewing male, really tech forward, really urban. So think New York, San Francisco, LA, and so on. It's the smallest of the 3 segments, but we've been extremely successful pretty quickly at acquiring them. They're really influential over their peers, right? They're really vocal online. They're the one you will meet on Twitter, who's always tweeting away and expressing opinions.
Right.
And typically, they're not on Facebook. They are not watching TV except for very specific live sports or live political events. Like that's why we advertise to democratic debates, for example, to reach them.
Mhm.
And again, politically, they're just because they are living in the city and they are tech forward. Some people might be like, of course, they're all liberal. No, actually, they are as well politically diverse. And that's one thing that I want to keep from 2 of the 3 segments that are more like, I will say, politically active and engaged, is that, approaching it with the bias to be like, okay, we're news and so on, let's go and target liberal audience will have been the wrong idea. And so we always stay in our communication saying news from all sides. We advertise as much in Fox News as we advertise in CNN or MSNBC. And from our perspective, we always make sure that our creative are extremely, um, you know, even when they cover politics, that they're presenting both perspective. It's really in the core DNA of Smart News to not pass judgment of what's right or wrong, empower instead of users to essentially analyze and provide them with quality information, allow them to essentially make the decisions themselves, not judge.
Right. Well, that's a great point. You are a news aggregator. You're not should be leaning towards the democratic or a conservative part. Always keep in mind that your readers are in both camps, and in the middle, your centric part.
Yeah.
Switching on product marketing alignment. Why do you think it was important for the app to be released successful in the United States?
It's a great question. I think very simply, the US, is both a place where our mission really needed to be expressed. I mean, when it comes to quality information, I think our founders saw the election of 2016 or even 2012, and they saw the rising dangers of social media. I think that was well illustrated with the interaction of January 6th.
Yeah.
How much people could essentially end up believing things that are not facts, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
how much the distrust of news became really important because of social media. So first, the mission. Why does it matter to be scaled in the US and really successfully? The second aspect is, I think, and I think it's great to share in this podcast. I think there is a true passion and interest from both our co-founders for the US, a true admiration for Google company culture and a few other Silicon Valley companies. And the ancestor of Smart News, before they pivoted away to building a news app, was presented at South by Southwest. So the
Mhm.
origin story of Smart
Yeah,
News
right.
itself was, when both of them took a plane from Tokyo to South by Southwest to present this prototype. The prototype wasn't very successful at South by Southwest, but nevertheless, I think it forged for them this willingness to go in the US and engage with the world largest market. And the third part is business as well, right? We are monetizing with ads for now. 100% of our revenue is ad driven. And from a size of the ad market compared to Japan, where we're already market leader, the US is about 10x, right? So you could aggregate a lot of Europe and you will still be a fraction of the US market when it comes to advertising demand, and especially mobile advertising demand, right? Where the US was sort of first to really push, and the demand is really important. So for all those three reasons, the mission, I will say the passion of our co-founders and the business, that's why it mattered to be scaled in the US.
Gotcha, Fabien. Next step on your list was all about adaptation. I know it's kind of hard to advise on this step because it involves the apps team and mindset to be able to adapt quickly or not. But what would you suggest strategically?
Well, yeah, it's, at the end of the day, the adaptation, I believe, and especially as we're heading towards a more uncertain time, this time it's not, a pandemic that's upending our lives, but it's very likely that there will be at least strong economic uncertainty in the coming months in Europe, in the US, in Asia. Um, my 2 cents is you could either be sort of sticking to your guns, sticking to your plan, and considering that your insights from a few months ago or a few weeks ago are
Irrelevant,
still
right?
valid,
Mhm.
or be extremely reactive to the change in the landscape. In this specific case, when we saw what was happening, right, when COVID became a global pandemic versus a local pandemic in China, we adapted fast. We say, okay, this is becoming number one worries people have is like, what's happening, and giving them access to metrics about their local communities in Japan and the US matters. When Ukraine conflict happened, same thing. And, when George Floyd protest happened, same thing, right? So for me, building this muscle will make the difference between businesses who are sort of first to who are not reacting fast enough. And as a result, ultimately they end up losing on markets and having to cut headcount pretty significantly. And those who, because they react, because they adapt, they're able to thrive and as well, not essentially part ways with great individuals that they have spent a lot of time and money hiring,
Mm.
which is what's happening, right? In some of the companies that
Right.
haven't been sort of being proactive, as a result, they are reactive. And it's never great to be just reactive, especially if you're a tech company.
Yeah, that's not the way you'll be able to compete with others in your market segment. You have to listen very carefully to the market, to what's going on with your users, what's going on with your competitors, the overall market trends, especially that level of overall bird view insight that App Any, or now called Data.ai, can provide. So getting back to the one of your former employers, who can give you a bird view on the market, on the app industry. And now moving on to the next step, which essentially is about the importance of having the right technology stack. Well, what we're not human, we're not superhumans. We just still regular human beings. We need technology in our hands to be able to manage complex tasks that are not just feasible to do manually. So what kind of technology stack do you have to get on board and stuff to support it?
Yeah. Well, I think, there is a changing landscape in every this answer could essentially change, right, every 6 to 9 months. I think from my perspective, it's about assessing at a certain point in the life of your company. And now I'm in super early stage, pre-funding.
Mhm.
Um, truly the tools and automation that will make your overall unit economics and more efficient on one end, or
Mhm.
save you a lot of time on the other end. For me, it's like, there's the money part, right? And there is the
Yeah.
time part. And both of them are really precious in this day and age. So speaking for SmartNews stack, of course, one of the first steps I took when I joined the US side was to assess if we had tools to monitor what the market was. And coming from Data.ai, of course, I essentially look at different mobile market data tools, assess the quality of the data for the US market, and then selected a product. It happened to be that at that time, Data.ai was the best product. Um, we are using another vendor, Nielsen, for Japan, historically speaking.
Mhm.
And so again, because of the what was the best data available at that time for the Japanese market. For me, understanding sort of what the competition was, were there more on the bigger on Android versus iOS, and in this specific case, Data.ai gave us the insight that there was a lot more market potential on Android versus iOS. We were the only news aggregation app that was bigger on iOS versus Android. And so we decided to scale, and now 75% for US users are Android. The second step is, again, you could do a lot of ad hoc research for consumer, and I think sometimes it's needed. Sometimes you do need like specific sample, and you need to find specific vendor that's really good at this specific type of users that you're trying to investigate. But I think having trusted vendors of record that you're using, putting in place, for example, in our case, every 3 months in the US, every month in Japan, we measure the awareness, we measure the preference, is extremely important. And so if you're going to do it on an ongoing basis, because it matters to measure it on an ongoing basis for yourself in competition to see how the awareness preference is changing, then you need to essentially assess different vendors, have a good, robust methodology in place, and keep working with the same one, because you're saving time and you're saving money. So as I say, those are two key dimensions. That's for the consumer. The third aspect is really the tech stack, right? The tech stack, at the end of the day, I believe there used to be bigger gaps between vendors. I think at this point, when it comes to mobile attribution, well, first on iOS, there is a lot less incentive, right, to have a mobile attribution partner. You could still have them. And on the Android side, from my perspective, I see two vendors, AppsFlyer and Adjust, which is now part of AppLovin, that are sort of like top of the market. And I tend to say, it matters because they have such a higher density and number of clients. They are essentially able to build faster, iterate faster, adapt faster than smaller vendors. And so I tend to say, hey, it's good. In terms of mobile engagement, I haven't worked in a while because we build everything in-house at SmartNews. We build our own push tech technology because it's deeply embedded with our machine learning technology. And so, but at the end of the day, I think there is vendors out there such as Braze or CleverTap and so on that provide solid solution. But you have to remember they are off the shelves, right? They are cross categories off the shelf. They're not custom to your specific vertical. So, but I think they are great once you're at the beginning and you don't have a big machine learning team, a big product team. They are definitely meeting a need. There is a lot of other vendors, of course, right? Whether it's analytics and so on. Again, from my perspective, I think the field has matured. A lot of the at this point, I think whether it's in terms of mediation layer for ads, in terms of analytics, I think things have matured. But at the end of the day, all those things are nothing without great experts behind them. And so always put and consider that tools without people might not be saving you that much money if they are not being leveraged. And so the way I would think about it is you could pick the best mobile market, data vendor, right? May that be Sensor Tower, Data.ai, you name it. If at the end of the day, you don't have a smart person behind it to essentially provide actionable recommendation, what's the point? And so it is, I think, mission critical for you to really think about the architecture of the team and of the tech stack together and not separately, because otherwise you end up, again, buying solutions or deploying something without having the people and the means to leverage the spend you're making. And I'm selling SaaS now, right? So, but again, it's diversity and inclusion platform like ours.
Right.
If you do not have an HR director, a diversity and inclusion manager, or a diversity champion inside the company that is going to be making sure that people connect with the platform, is not useful. Right? Just buying us without having someone that will make sure people are aware of it. So that's why I think it's very important to approach.
Yeah, totally true. Borrowing from Eastern philosophy, yin and yang, people and tools, you always have to have both. Otherwise, it's just wasting of your money and effort. Let's cover the last step on your list, which was actually trying unusual things with the product and to increase engagement and revenue. That's not what I think people have guts or inspiration quite often to do, because they're trying to stick to the product and to steps that are proven, tried before. But so what was your experience of trying unusual ideas for the Smart News?
Yeah. Well, I think, first I want to give, give back to Caesar the credit, or in this case, my former manager, Nishiguchi-san is really brilliant man for Japan. And again, he really infused our Japanese teams with this customer centricity. And so the way he looked at it is to say, hey, when we look at all the segments of the Japanese market, which segments are we under indexing, especially when it comes to preference, and what do they want? um, it's not always right. So there was a few experiments that didn't work out, including learning English. We built an English channel for Japan with the idea it's like, hey, we could be considered sort of a proxy language learning tool, right, by giving them exposure to written content. That didn't work. But on the other end, he did notice that we had a lot of non-Tokyo users, a lot of female users that were going out for lunch. And some of them were using Smart News. Many of them were not using a news app. So thinking was like, we're under indexing for those users. They're definitely using and engaging their smartphone during lunch. How do we get them to start Smart News? And then maybe read the news. But first, get them to open the app. And that's where the lunch coupons concept was born. Luckily, he was as well someone with an incredible network among executive for McDonald's, KFC, and different convenience store and Japanese local chains. And as a result, I think he had a two-in-one where he uncovered the right insights about those users, but as well he had the capability to make sure that everyone was aligned. And of course, those chains were delighted to provide us exclusive coupons, because at the end of the day, we're driving foot traffic to them, right, through those promotions. And so as a result, the app exploded. And what is, always fascinating, and I think where you could see great marketing, is our existing users, but as well many users installed the app initially, of course, saying, hey, it's great, there's a lunch coupon, I'm going to save some money. Right. But they started reading the news, and they started reading the news more and more. And so as a result, we live up to our mission. So, a lot of, including within the company, initially there was skepticism. Oh, maybe those users are going to be not reading the news. So we're not living up to our mission. We're just giving them, discounts. And this is where it is important to have consumer-driven innovation. It's a perfect example, right? If we're all in my team, be like, this is not news. We're not, focusing on.
Right.
Well, first of all, we're here to provide information. And information is broader than news, right, as a company. And second of all, again, different type of people and segments of users will need different reasons. Some people don't need any reasons. They are they're really big in news reading, and then that's fine, great. And some people, they will need the reasons that, hey, I'm going to give you this balanced perspective about politics. And that's one thing we did for a US user, giving them the option to slide left to right and understand that, how each side was perceiving the same news. And some people, they need to be told, hey, I'm going to save you some money. And, it's extremely important, especially when you have a lower available income, or maybe you're supporting your entire family on one salary. It is extremely important not to judge, but by contrast of really listening to those users.
Yeah, that's a very interesting example of how you can attract people's attention, thinking out of the box. What could be the starting point? How can I legitimately, reasonably pick up their attention with something that is useful for them? And then they can jump on reading news, because this is like, what's going on around them is something that is interesting for all of us. Like, we're social creatures. It's just some people prefer the apps because they know about their existence. This is part of their routine. Some may have no idea that's actually possible. and you can lure these people to your brand by giving them something that is kind of an introduction. And it can be just like you're saying, coupons, something that it's kind of a different, but just like you're saying, this is the information about financial discounts and information about the news in general. We're covering the set of topics that you laid out in New York at APS. And there's actually a second segment on the show when I'm asking quick questions every second guest on this show. And these are just quick ones. So here we go. Question number one. What smartphone do you have now? Have you been switching between Android and iOS, or just staying one camp all the time?
I have a Samsung S10 Plus, which is about 3 years old, and I've been on Android since 2011. At that time, I got an iPhone stolen. I look at the price to get a new iPhone, and I was like, okay, no way. And honestly, I never looked back. The main reason for me is I think the color quality of the Samsung screen is just amazing, and I'm very visual. I guess that's why I became a marketer. And B, I inherently love working with the Google team. I think the Google Play team has been amazing to work with. Google Ads team as well. I think as a company culture, they're extremely customer centric.
Mhm.
Coming back to that,
Yeah.
and
Good topic.
so that's another incentive for me to keep using Android as my main OS.
Okay. What was your first mobile phone before the iPhone, before smartphone era?
Okay. Well, my very first one, I think in the 1997, I want to say, and it was Sagem, which is a French brand, and
Are
so it was a
are
very
they still
big block.
around?
I think they might be in some developing countries still around, but don't don't quote me on that. I just know that I was very excited, and then within 6 months, I actually sat on it and broke the screen. So that was my first broken screen as well experience.
Yeah. First broken screen. Yeah, it's always tough. Now imagine today you left your smartphone at home. What would be the most missing feature for you when you're out?
Well, I think I'm pretty good at orienting myself, so not gonna be Google Map, but I think there is a quality to my phone which is like really filling the blanks with news and information. So I will honestly regret not being able to read the news, and it's really hard in many places, at least in France and the US, to find actual newspaper. So probably reading the news.
Yeah, there's no way you can replace with the actual paper. Um, Now, nothing is perfect, and technology included. When you're looking at your smartphone, do you see anything that is missing for you right now? It could be hardware, software, or both. And you go like, wouldn't it be great if that device being capable of doing this or that?
Yeah, well, I think there is some software available that's pretty imperfect. I really wish like sometimes we had like a live translation. The I believe the Google earbuds and a few other devices were promising that. And unfortunately, I think the support for some specific language pairing that I needed, namely like Korean to French or Korean to English, wasn't available. My wife speaks to her parents in Korean, and
Mhm.
so sometimes I wish I could just listen
Ah,
in.
would be great. Yeah, absolutely. That would be, yeah, I still wonder. I do remember about those earbuds that were providing the translation service on the fly, and right now it's just looks like they're gone from the market, never took off. But yeah, that would be really great to have them in your ears when you're in somewhere in Asia and having a real translation all the time. Okay, before I let you go, just a final question. How can people get in touch with you and get more information about what you do, Pierre?
Yeah, well, LinkedIn all the way. I post updates at least 2 or 3 times per day about my thoughts about mobile app industry, about gaming, about diversity and inclusion, about some of the political milestones that are happening in the US or in France. So go on LinkedIn. You could check those updates, but as well, of course, add me and contact me. The only request is please give a bit of context, because when I get, I think right now I have about 50 requests
Oh
incoming,
my gosh.
and if I have no context whatsoever why you want to connect, and we haven't met before, like Art, right? I've met you, so it's
Right.
like I know if you add me to LinkedIn, what the context is. I tend to be a bit selective. Otherwise, I think people should use the messaging feature, the email, but not try to add me as a prelude
Right.
to a conversation.
Out of the blue. All right. Thank you, Fabien, for coming on our podcast and spending time with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
And that was Fabien-Pierre Nicolas, advisor at SmartNews. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. We release episodes on Mondays, so subscribe and you'll be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Apps podcast. For more, head on over to businessofapps.com.